For 2 days and nights we were carried deep into the land of our fears. Occasionally the loaves of bread were passed around, but no provision had been made for sanitation, and the air in the car was such that few could eat. More terrible than the crush of bodies in the filth, the single obsession was something to drink. 2 or 3 times when the train stopped, the door slid open a few inches and a pail of water passed in. But we had become animals, incapable of plan or system. Those near the door got it all. On the morning of the 4th day, the train stopped again, and the door was opened, its full width. Like infants, on hands and knees, we crawled to the opening and lowered ourselves over the side. In front of us was a blue lake. On the far side, among sycamore trees, rose a white church steeple. The stronger prisoners hauled buckets of water from the lake. We drank through cracked and swollen lips. The cars carrying the men had disappeared. Only a handful of soldiers, some of them looking no older than 15, were there to guard 1,000 women. No more were needed. We could scarcely walk, let alone resist. After a while, they marched us off. For a mile, the road followed the shore of the lake and then left it to climb a hill. I wondered if Betsy could make it to the top, but the sight of trees and sky had revived her, and she supported me as much as I her. We passed a number of local people on foot and in horse-drawn wagons. The children seemed wonderful to me, pink-cheeked and healthy. They returned to my stares with wide-eyed interest. The adults, however, turned their heads away. From the crest of the hill we saw it, a city of low gray barracks surrounded by concrete walls on which guard towers rose at intervals. In the very center, a square smokestack emitted a thin gray vapor into the air. Ravensbrück. The word passed back through the lines. This was the notorious death camp, whose name we had heard even in Haarlem. As Betsy and I stumbled down the hill, I felt the Bible bumping between my shoulder blades. God's good news. Was it to this world that he had spoken it? Now we were close enough to see the skull and crossbones on the walls to warn of electrified wiring along the top. The massive iron gates swung in. We marched between them. Acres of soot-gray barracks stretched ahead of us. Just inside the wall was a row of water spigots. We charged them, thrusting hands, arms, legs, even heads under the streams of water, washing away the stench of the boxcars. A squad of women guards rushed at us, shouting and driving us back from the faucets. We were herded down an avenue between barracks. This camp appeared far grimmer than the one we had left. It was set down in a long man-made valley, rising on every side to those towering wire-topped walls. At last we halted. In front of us, a vast canvas tent roof, no sides, covered an acre or more of straw-strewn ground. Betsy and I found a spot on the edge of this area and sank down. Instantly we were on our feet again. Lice! The straw was alive with them. We stood for a while, clutching belongings away from the infested ground. But at last we spread our blankets over the squirming straw and sat on them. Some of the prisoners had brought scissors. Everywhere beneath the huge tent, women were cutting one another's hair to discourage the lice. Of course, we must do the same. Long hair was folly in such a place. But as I cut Betsy's waves, I cried. Toward evening, there was a commotion at one end of the tent. A line of SS guards was moving across it, driving women out from under the canvas. We scrambled to our feet and snatched up our blankets as they bore down upon us. Perhaps 100 yards beyond the tent, the chase stopped. We stood about, uncertain what to do. Whether a new group of prisoners had arrived or what the reason was for driving us from the tent, no one knew. Women began spreading their blankets on the hard cinder ground. Slowly it dawned on Betsy and me that we were to spend the night here, where we stood. We laid my blanket on the ground, stretched out side by side, and pulled hers over us. The night is dark, and I am far from home. Betsy's sweet soprano was picked up by voices all around. Lead thou me on. We were woken up sometime in the middle of the night by a clap of thunder and a deluge of rain. The blankets soaked through, and water gathered in puddles beneath us. In the morning, our faces were black from the cinder mud. We were still wringing water from our blankets when the command came to line up for coffee. There was a slice of black bread for each prisoner, then nothing more until we were given a ladle of turnip soup and a small boiled potato late in the afternoon. In between, we were kept standing at rigid attention on the soggy ground where we had spent the night. We were near one edge of the huge camp, close enough to the outer wall to see the triple row of electric wires running along the top. 2 entire days we spent this way, stretching out again the second night where we stood. It did not rain again, but ground and blankets were still damp. Betsy began to cough. I took Noli's blue sweater from my pillowcase, wrapped it around her, and gave her a few drops of the vitamin oil. By morning, she had agonizing intestinal cramps. On the third night, the order came to report to the processing center. A 10-minute march brought us to the building. We inched along a corridor into a huge reception room. There, under the harsh ceiling lights, we saw a dismal sight. As each woman reached a desk where some officers sat, she had to lay whatever she carried onto a growing pile. A few desks further along, she had to strip off every scrap of clothes, throw them onto a second pile, and walk naked past the scrutiny of a dozen SS men into the shower room. Coming out of the shower, each woman put on only a thin prison dress and a pair of shoes. But Betsy needed that sweater. She needed the vitamins. Most of all, we needed our Bible. How could we live in this place without it? We were almost at the first desk. I fished in my pillowcase, threw out the bottle of vitamins, and closed my fists around them. Reluctantly, we dropped the other things on the heap that was fast becoming a mountain. Dear God, I prayed, you have given us this precious book. You have kept it hidden through checkpoints and inspections. You have used it for so many. I felt Betsy stagger against me and looked at her in alarm. Her face was white, her lips pressed tight together. I begged a guard in German to show us the toilets. He jerked his head in the direction of the shower room. Betsy and I stepped out of line and walked to the door of the big, dank-smelling room with its row of overhead spigots. It was empty, waiting for the next batch of 50 naked and shivering women to be admitted. Please, I said to the SS man guarding the door, where are the toilets? Use the drain holes, he snapped as we stepped inside. He slammed the door behind us. We stood alone in the room, where a few minutes later we would return, stripped of the clothes on our backs. Here were the prison things we were to put on, piled just inside the door. Then we saw a pile of benches stacked in the corner. They were slimy with mildew, crawling with cockroaches, but to me they seemed the furniture of heaven itself. Take that sweater off, I hissed, fumbling with the string at my neck. Betsy handed it to me, and in an instant I had wrapped it around the Bible and the vitamin bottle and stuffed the bundle behind the benches. So when we were herded into that room 10 minutes later, we were not poor, but rich. Rich in this new evidence of the care of him who is God, even of Ravensbrück. We stood beneath the spigots as long as the flow of icy water lasted, feeling it soften our lice-eaten skin. Then we clustered, dripping wet, around the heap of prison dresses, holding them up, looking for approximate fits. I squirmed into a dress and then reached beneath the benches and shoved the little bundle quickly inside the neck. It made a bulge you could have seen across groat marked. I flattened it out as best I could, but there was no real concealing it beneath the thin cotton dress. All the while I had the incredible feeling that it did not matter, that all I had to do was walk straight ahead. As we trooped back out through the shower room door, the SS men ran their hands over every prisoner, front, back, and sides. The woman ahead of me was searched 3 times. Behind me, Betsy was searched. No hand touched me. At the exit door to the building was a second ordeal, a line of women guards examining each prisoner again. I slowed down, but a guard shoved me. Move along, you're holding up the line. Betsy and I arrived in Barracks 8, bringing not only the Bible, but a new knowledge of the power of God. There were 3 women already asleep in the bed assigned to us. They made room for us as best they could, but the mattress sloped and I kept sliding to the floor. At last, all 5 of us lay sideways across the bed and managed to get shoulders and elbows arranged. The blanket was threadbare, but the overcrowding produced its own warmth. Betsy had put on the blue sweater beneath her dress. Now that she was wedged between me and the others, her shivering gradually subsided, and she was asleep. I lay awake a while longer, watching a searchlight sweep the wall in long, regular arcs. Life grew harder. There was too much misery, too much suffering. Every day something grew too heavy. Will you carry this, Lord Jesus? But as the rest of the world grew stranger, one thing became increasingly clear, and that was the reason the 2 of us were here. From morning until lights out, whenever we were not in ranks for roll call, our Bible was the center of an ever-widening circle of help and hope. We gathered around it, holding out our heart to its warmth and light. The blacker the night around us grew, the brighter and truer burned the word of God. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. I would look about us as Betsy read, watching the light leap from face to face. More than conquerors. It was a fact. We experienced it. Poor, hated, hungry, we are more than conquerors. Not we shall be, we are. I had believed the Bible always, but reading it now had nothing to do with belief. It now was a description of the way things were, of hell and heaven, of how men act and how God acts. I had read 1,000 times the story of Jesus' arrest, how soldiers had slapped him, laughed at him, flogged him. Now, such happenings had faces and voices. Every day the sun rose a little later. The bite took longer to leave the air. I worried about Betsy and her cough. I was doling out a drop of the Davidamin each morning on her piece of black bread, but how much longer could the small bottle last? Especially, I would tell her, if you keep sharing it around every time someone sneezes. The move to permanent quarters came the second week in October 1944. Betsy and I stared at the long gray front of Barracks 28. Half its windows had been broken and replaced with rags. A door in the center led us into a large room where 200 more women bent over knitting needles. On tables between them were piles of gray woolen socks. Our noses told us first that the place was filthy. Somewhere plumbing had backed up and the bedding was soiled and rancid. Then, as our eyes adjusted to the gloom, we saw that there were no individual beds at all, but great square piers stacked 3 high, wedged side by side, and end to end with an occasional narrow aisle slicing through. We followed our guide single file to the center of a large block. She pointed to the second tier. To reach it, we had to stand on the bottom level, haul ourselves up, and then crawl across 3 other straw-covered platforms to reach the one that we would share with how many? The deck above us was too close to let us sit up. We lay back, struggling against the nausea that swept over us from the reeking straw. We could hear other women finding their places. Suddenly, I sat up, striking my head on the cross slats above. Something had pinched my leg. Fleas, I cried. The place was swarming with them. We scrambled across the platforms, head low to avoid another bump, dropped down to the aisle, and edged our way to the patch of light. Betsy, how can we live in such a place? I wailed. Show us how. It was said so matter-of-factly it took me a second to realize she was praying. The distinction between prayer and the rest of life seemed to be vanishing for Betsy. Corrie, she said excitedly, in the Bible this morning. Where was it? Read that part again. I glanced down the dim aisle to make sure no guard was in sight, then drew the Bible from its pouch. It was in 1 Thessalonians, I said. Here it is. Comfort the frightened, help the weak, be patient with everyone. See that none of you repays evil for evil, but always seek to do good one another and to one another and to all. Go on, said Betsy. Oh, yes. To one another and to all. Rejoice always, pray constantly, give thanks in all circumstances. That's it, Corrie. That's his answer. Give thanks in all circumstances. That's what we can do. We can thank God for everything about this new barracks. I stared at her, then around me at the foul-aired room. Such as? I said. Such as being assigned here together. I bit my lip. Oh, yes, Lord Jesus. Such as what you're holding in your hands. I looked down at the Bible. Thank you, dear Lord, that there was no inspection when we entered here. Thank you for all the women here in this room who will meet you in these pages. Yes, said Betsy. Thank you for the very crowding here, since we're packed so close that many more will hear. She looked at me expectantly. Oh, all right, I said. Thank you for the jammed, crowded, packed, suffocating crowds. Thank you, Betsy went on, for the fleas and for... This was too much. Betsy, there's no way even God can make me grateful for a flea. Give thanks in all circumstances, she quoted. Fleas are part of this place where God has put us. So we gave thanks for fleas. Barracks 28 had been designed to hold 400 women. There were now 1,400 quartered here, with more arriving as concentration camps in Poland, France, Belgium, Austria, and Holland were evacuated toward the center of Germany. 9 of us shared our particular square designed for 4. 8 overflowing toilets served the entire room. To reach them, we had to crawl not only over our own bedmates, but over those on other platforms between us and the closest aisle, always at the risk of adding too much weight to the already sagging slats and crashing down on the people beneath. In Barracks 28, there was not a common language, and among exhausted, ill-fed people, quarrels erupted constantly. One raged now as the woman sleeping nearest the windows slammed them shut against the cold. Loud voices demanded they be raised again. Brawls were starting. We heard scuffling, slaps, sobs. I felt Betsy's hand clasp mine. Lord Jesus, she said aloud, send your peace into this room. There had been too little praying here. There has been too little praying here. The very walls know it. But where you come, Lord, the spirit of strife cannot exist. One by one, the angry sounds let up. I'll make you a deal, the voice spoke German with a Scandinavian accent. You can sleep here when it's warmer, and I'll take your place by the window. And add your lice to my own? But there was a chuckle in the answer. No, thanks. I'll tell you what, the third voice had a French accent. We'll open them halfway. That way we'll be only half frozen, and you'll be only half smothered. A ripple of laughter widened around the room at this. I lay back on the straw and knew there was one more circumstance for which I could give thanks. Betsy had come to Barracks 28. Roll call came at 4:30 a.m. A whistle roused us at 4, when the stampede began for the ration of bread and coffee in the center room. The count was made in the Lagerstrasse, the wide avenue leading to the hospital. There we joined the occupants of other barracks, some 35,000 at that time, stretching out of sight. After roll call, work crews were called out. For weeks, Betsy and I were assigned to the Siemens factory. This complex of mills and railroad terminals was a mile and a half from the camp. Several thousand of us marched beneath the charged wires into a world of trees and grass and horizons. The sun rose as we skirted the little lake. The work at Siemens was sheer misery. Betsy and I had to push a heavy handcart to a railroad siding, where we unloaded large metal plates from a boxcar and wheeled them to a receiving gate at the factory. The grueling workday lasted 11 hours. At noontime, we were given a boiled potato and some thin soup. Those who worked inside the camp had no midday meal. At day's end, back at the barracks, we received our ladle of turnip soup. Then, as quickly as we could, Betsy and I made our way to the rear of the dormitory room, where we held our worship service. Back here, a small light bulb cast a wan yellow circle on the wall, allowing us to read the Bible. An ever larger group of women gathered. They were services like no others, these times in Barracks 28. A meeting might include a recital in Latin by a group of Roman Catholics, a whispered hymn by some Lutherans, and a soft-voiced chant by Eastern Orthodox women. The women around us packed the platforms, hanging over the edges. Then either Betsy or I would open the Bible, because only the Hollanders could understand the Dutch text. We would translate aloud in German. We would hear the words passed back along the aisles in French, Polish, Russian, Czech, back into Dutch. They were previews of heaven, these evenings beneath the light bulb. I would know again that in darkness God's truth shines most clear. No guard ever came near us. So many women now wanted to join us that we held a second service after evening roll call. On the Lagerstrasse, we were under rigid surveillance. It was the same in the center room of the barracks, a half a dozen guards or camp police always present. Yet in the large dormitory room, there was almost no supervision at all. We did not understand it. Another strange thing was happening. The Davidamin bottle continued to produce drops. It seemed impossible. So small a bottle, so many doses a day. Now, in addition to Betsy, a dozen others were taking it. I tried to save it for the very weakest, but these soon numbered 15, 20, 25. Still, every time I tilted the little bottle, a drop appeared at the top of the glass stopper. It just could not be. I held it up to the light, trying to see how much was left, but the dark brown glass was too thick to see through. There was a woman in the Bible, Betsy said, whose oil jar was never empty. She turned to the Book of Kings, the story of the poor widow of Zarephath, who gave Elijah a room in her home. Yes, wonderful things happened all through the Bible, but they happened here too, now, this day, and the next, as an odd little group watched the drops fall onto the daily rations of bread. One day, Mien, a young Dutch woman we had met in Vogue, came to me in the food line. She was assigned to the hospital. "Look what I've got for you." We peered into the small sack she carried. "Vitamins," I whispered with joy. "Yeast compound." "Yes," she hissed back. There were several huge jars. I emptied each jar just the same amount. Back at the bunk, I took the little bottle from the straw. We finished the drops first, I decided. But that night, no matter how long I held it upside down, not another drop of the vitamin appeared. On the 1st of November, Betsy and I were put to work leveling some rough ground just inside the camp wall. This, too, was back-breaking labor. At night, spasms of pain gripped my legs. But the biggest problem was Betsy's strength. One morning, after a hard night's rain, we arrived to find the ground sodden and heavy. Betsy stumbled frequently as she walked to the low ground where we dumped the loads. A guard screamed at her, "Can't you go faster?" Then the guard threw herself into a parody of Betsy's faltering walk. The other guards and even some of the prisoners laughed. I felt a murderous anger rise. The guard was young and well-fed. Was it Betsy's fault that she was old and starving? But to my astonishment, Betsy laughed too. "That's me, all right," she admitted. "But you better let me totter along, or I'll have to stop altogether." The guard's cheeks went crimson. "I'll decide who's to stop." Snatching the leather crop from her belt, she slashed Betsy across the cheek and neck. Without knowing I was doing it, I seized my shovel and rushed at her. Betsy stopped in front of me before anyone had seen. "Corrie," she pleaded. She tugged the shovel from my hand and dug it into the mud. A red stain appeared on Betsy's collar. A welt began to swell in her neck. Betsy laid a thin hand over the whip mark. "Don't look at it, Corrie. Look at Jesus only." She drew away her hand. It was sticky with blood. In mid-November, the rain started in earnest. Chilly, drenching, day-long downpours. The Lagerstrasse was never dry now, even when the rain let up. Deep puddles stood in the road. We often stood at attention in water up to our ankles. Betsy's cough began to bring up blood. We went to sick call at the hospital, but the thermometer registered 102 degrees. Not enough to admit her. We had to go back again and again as Betsy's condition grew worse. To her, this was simply another setting in which to talk about Jesus. Wherever she was, Betsy spoke to those around her about his nearness and his yearning to come into their lives. And as her body grew weaker, her faith seemed to grow bolder. And the sick call was such an important place, Corrie. Some of these people are at the very threshold of heaven. One night, Betsy's fever registered over the required 104 degrees. After a long wait, a nurse appeared to lead her to a hospital bed. I stayed with them as far as the door to the ward, then made my way back to the barracks. Women crowded around me asking after Betsy. How was she? How long would she have to stay? Lights out blew and the scramble into the bunks began. I hoisted myself to the middle tier and crawled across those already in place. What a difference since Betsy had come to this room. Where before this had been the moment for fighting, tonight the huge dormitory buzzed with "sorry" and "excuse me." I found our section in the dark and squeezed into a spot in the middle. How was it possible, packed so close, to be utterly and miserably alone?